You know, the point in time in which we exist, it doesn't take rocket science to diagnose what is wrong with the situation. But we see so few people engaging in the act of trying to treat the condition that we find ourselves in socially. We find theorist upon theorist upon theorist who keeps on engaging in the process of re-diagnosing the situation over again. How many more books do we need critiquing the tyranny and unintelligence of capitalism? How many more works do we need critiquing the nature of the financial economy? How many more works do we need on this? We know what the problem is. We've understood it for a very, very long time, but for some reason, intellectuals just can't get past this stage of diagnosing. And I'll tell you why I think this is. Because these intellectuals are trying to make a name for themselves. They want recognition. Their work is not about treating the situation. They don't even think of it in these terms. Their work, their approach, their project is about trying to write a book or say something clever that gets them recognition from their peers or from other people, the general public. That's what they're really trying to do. They want to be celebrated as a great theorist. That's what they're striving for. And it annoys me to no end because my thought is always thinking about, we know what the problem is. We know that capitalism is exploitative. We know that it impoverishes people. We know it's a system of inequality. So my thought is, what the fuck do we do about it? It's not enough to just diagnose. Another professor comes out and says, my book on capitalism just got published with Routledge. There's already 1,000 fucking books on capitalism. Why do we need another one? Why are these people who were trained and they're beneficiaries of society, why are they not applying their intellectual powers to treating the problem, to figuring out what can we actually do about it? Moving away from merely analyzing, merely diagnosing, to actually getting into the mindset of concrete treatment. What are the concrete steps that we can take to actually remedy or make the situation better? I have tried to think about this. My life was drastically altered when I came into contact with the thought of Theodor Adorno. And the reason is because he taught me something very important. Adorno was constantly criticizing mindless activism. He was constantly criticizing protests. And I never encountered this type of criticism before. I never thought critically about a protest. I never thought critically about resistance. And Adorno said the right thing. He said the important thing. These people who engage in these works of resistance are never thinking about how their resistance can be effective in altering the concrete conditions of the situation. That's the whole problem. They never think about how their resistant activity can actually be effective. All they think about is that it's resistant activity. It is what I'm supposed to do. It's mindless. That's why Adorno critiqued it. It simply lands at this point that there are problems with the way the system is ordered, And then it says, well, the logical and rational thing to do is simply protest. But that's not thinking. That means that we stop thinking at the point where we end at the conclusion of protest. At the point where we end at the conclusion of resistance. When in fact, that process of thought needs to continue. It needs to move forward. We need to keep on thinking, how can my protest be effective? How can I maximize the power of my resistant activity and the resistant activity of others so it is actually more effective? Instead of just embodying an ideal of resistance that makes me feel good in my ego, but it doesn't actually alter the oppressive conditions. And then you get this self-righteousness rising up from protesters. We are doing the right thing. We are doing the intelligent thing. The claim doesn't even need to really be made because it's insinuated. It's presupposed within the nature of their resistant theory that they are the ones who are moral, because they're the ones who are willing to hold up a sign. But this does not make them intelligent. That is not a guarantee of an intelligent act of resistance. This matters. It matters because we're facing systems that cause great inequality and great suffering. And we need to think about how our resistant activity can be effective. So these protesters, they hold forth the idea that they are morally superior because they're willing to hold up a sign. But little do they continue to analyze as to whether or not their tactics are effective at all. In most cases that I have seen in my time, individuals who take this self-righteous ego appeasement of protesting, of holding up signs, of creating disorder in the street, these people end up causing damage a lot of the time. Because not only do they not alter the oppressive conditions they are protesting, but they cause the general public to turn away. They turn in the opposite direction. They turn in an authoritarian direction. And worst case scenario, these protesters, these resistors, end up creating a situation, a reaction, where laws are passed that end up further diminishing freedom. So Adorno greatly revolutionized me as a thinker because he put it into my consciousness, wait a second, I can't just think about resisting. I have got to think about how my resistance can be effective. This is the thing that I always come into collision with other left intellectuals, because this is what is working at the base of my thought. It's like an axiom, always causing me to rethink the situation. And when I come into collision with other intellectuals on social media, these intellectuals don't understand that, and it takes a long time for me to explain it, to make them understand where I'm coming from. So all that happens is there's a conversation regarding the lack of value, the futility, the mindlessness of their protest, and then they just think that I'm a person who's against protest, and this is not true. I'm all for resistance, but I am not for mindless resistance. Nobody should be for mindless resistance. That is not good enough. It is dangerous. It causes problems. And the people that are told this, that are rebuked and corrected in this sense, boy, do they ever resent it. Because for them, it's not about affecting social conditions. It's about identifying with a particular movement. It's about cultivating a particular image of self-righteousness. It's not about actually impacting and altering the oppressive conditions. So intellectuals like myself that advocate for that, intellectuals like Adorno that advocate for that, we are viewed as the bad guys. We are viewed as people who are trying to shut down resistance activity. Not true. We are trying to expand its power. We are trying to increase its effectiveness so that oppressive conditions are actually altered. You have all this resistant energy. Why are you wasting this resistant energy and this resistant courage on tactics, on techniques that do not alter the situation, and they do worse than that? They negatively impact the situation. They negatively frame the situation. They lose the discourse within the public sphere. So this is a problem. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to be able to diagnose the situation that we are dealing with right now in society. But it does take intelligence to realize, wait a second, why am I continuing to reinvent the wheel? Why haven't I moved past this point yet and tried to figure out how the treatment of the situation works? Why do I keep on diagnosing? Because that act of diagnosing does something for you. Because the public responds to it in a positive way, because they mistake that for actual resistant work. They mistake that for actual revolutionary work. That when you are writing a book critiquing capitalism, you are in fact a revolutionary. You are in fact a resistor, because that's what revolutionaries do. That's what resistors do. Wrong. You don't reinvent the wheel. If you're intelligent, you use the wheel to get somewhere else. And that's what's not happening within the intellectual atmosphere of the United States or even the world at large. People have not moved into praxis. They are just staying on the point of analysis because it gives them what they want in terms of developing their intellectual image. They want to develop this idea of being a great theorist, of being authoritative, of being valued, of everyone looking up to them and saying, oh, these books, they're so great. This theorist is just the greatest theorist alive. He's so important. They want their little fan club. They want their little cult. They have not gotten beyond their psychology in this sense, and that is not good enough for a thinker. A thinker should know better. A thinker should continue to be rational beyond this point. We should be suspicious of our motivation. What it must shift back to, it must find its way back to the motive of freedom. Not the self-centered, egotistical motive, but back to the motive of freedom, because that's the important thing. That's the thing that matters. That is what theory is trying to achieve. That is what theory needs to achieve. And so this activity, this egoism, this mindless protestism that's taking place in the world today is all backward and wrong, and it's not going to alter the oppressive conditions in which we find ourselves. That requires thought. That requires people thinking, coming together and thinking about how to treat what has been diagnosed, to find ingenious, non-violent, resistant tactics that can carry people forward and increase the power of their resistant activity. Our lives are very short. We don't have time to be playing ego games with ourselves. Richard Feynman said that we are always trying to fool ourselves, and we are the easiest person to fool. And that's precisely what's constantly going on. Thought must occupy the objective position, the place that exists beyond psychology. It must be able to get to the point where it is seeking quality in existence, a qualitative social existence, as opposed to its own validation of egoism. And so this dilemma, this mindlessness that continues to proliferate in the world is exceedingly disappointing. One of the things that upsets me the most is the fact that people don't see this, the fact that the masses in general end up celebrating vain intellectuals. Not intellectuals who are actually trying to alter oppressive conditions, but intellectuals who keep on reinventing the wheel. Intellectuals who are posturing for fame. Intellectuals who want to make a name for themselves and be authoritative, and people fall for this. People will defend these intellectuals as being important intellectuals, and they're not. They're engaged in an abstract project. They're engaged in irrelevant semantics that do not apply to the concrete alteration of our oppressive social conditions, and that is what thinkers should be concerned with. In this day and age, we have an atmosphere where individuals do not listen to rationality because they don't know how. They don't know how to think. It's an emotional age. The emotional sphere has dominated. The egocentric self is supreme, and individuals are evaluating information based upon how it makes them feel, as to whether or not it appeases their ego. If they see someone say something, make a video that makes them feel empowered or makes them feel validated, they think it's a good video. It doesn't matter if the argument is bankrupt. It doesn't matter if the thought is mindless. They do not care. They are evaluating based on their emotional bias. So one of the things that disappoints me is that I'm aware of this. I'm aware that people fucking respond to emotion. You see, I purposely said that because that's what people fucking respond to. It moves them. They suddenly feel fucking moved by it. This is disappointing because it means that people are easily manipulated and that the rhetoric that can be used is so shallow to get them to believe particular narratives because they can be indoctrinated into the narrative through their emotional structure. And this is disappointing. I would that we lived in a culture that was rational, where people evaluated people on the basis of the substance of what they say, whether or not it comports with evidence, whether or not it is rational, not whether or not it offends them, not whether or not it validates their bias or makes them feel good, but whether or not it is true, whether or not it is credible. I would that we lived in this type of age. I would that we lived in this type of culture, but we don't. We live in an irrational age, and because of that, it is necessary for intelligence to make use of emotion in order to propagate itself in the world, in order to push its case. The message of all of this is that it is important for us to be mindful. It is important for us to ask the question of relevance and the question of value. Why is the project that I am engaged in relevant? Why does it have value? When we ask these two questions, the most revolutionary questions that a thinker can ever ask, when we ask these two questions, our own program is revolutionized. It is moved in the direction of contemplating quality, of contemplating value, and then trying to set about to get beyond a stage of mere vain diagnosis to get to the point where we can begin intelligently treating the problem.